On January 29th, Iraqi forces with tanks and infantry attacked and occupied the lightly defended Saudi city of Khafji. It was to be Iraq's only offensive of the war. The Iraqi offensive to take Khafji began on the night of January 29th when approximately 2,000 soldiers in several hundred armored fighting vehicles moved south. The Gulf War's first ground engagement was near Observation Post 4, built in the Al-Zabir police building. Elements of the Iraqi 6th Armored Brigade, ordered to take the heights above Al-Zabir, engaged coalition units at Al-Zabir. At 2000 hours, U.S. Marines at the observation post, who had noticed large groups of armored vehicles through their night vision devices, attempted to contact battalion headquarters but received no response. Contact was established at 20:30 hours, which prompted the Marines to respond to the threat. Coalition soldiers at Observation Post 4 opened fire on the Iraqi column, but this largely ineffective fire drew a heavy Iraqi response, which forced the company to retire south. Soon thereafter, a number of A-10 ground attack aircraft arrived, but found it difficult to pinpoint enemy targets, so began dropping flares to eliminate the zone. An additional Iraqi column crossed the Saudi border to the east, although still along the coast toward the city of Khafji. Khafji was occupied by approximately 0:30 hours on January 30th. Throughout the night, coalition air support, composed of helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, continued to engage Iraqi tanks and artillery. Distressed by the occupation of Khafji, Saudi Commander General Khalid bin Sultan appealed to American General Norman Schwarzkopf for an immediate air campaign against Iraqi forces in and around the city. This was turned down, and it was instead decided that the city would be retaken by Arab forces. The task fell to the 2nd Saudi Arabian National Guard Brigade's 7th Battalion, composed of Saudi infantry and 2 Qatari tank companies attached to the task force. These were supported by U.S. Army Special Forces and Marine reconnaissance personnel. The force moved out by 1700 hours. They met up with elements of the U.S. 3rd Marine Regiment south of Khafji and were ordered to directly attack the city. The attempt to retake the city was preceded by a 15-minute preparatory fire from U.S. Marine artillery. Meanwhile, 2nd Saudi Arabian National Guard Brigade's 5th Battalion moved north of Khafji to block Iraqi reinforcements attempting to reach the city. The interdiction on the part of coalition aircraft, Marine artillery, and Saudi and Qatari ground forces was having an effect on the occupying Iraqi troops. Referring to Saddam Hussein's naming of the ground engagement as the mother of all battles, Iraqi General Salah radioed in a request to withdraw, stating, "The mother was killing her children." Coalition aircraft continued to provide heavy support throughout the day and night. A veteran of the Iran-Iraq War later mentioned that coalition air power imposed more damage on his brigade in half an hour than it had sustained in 8 years of fighting against the Iranians. The Saudi and Qatari units renewed operations the following day, and the city was recaptured on February 1st, 1991. After Khafji, the coalition's leadership began to sense that the Iraqi army was a hollow force, and it provided them with an impression of the degree of resistance they would face during the coalition's ground offensive that would begin 24 hours later. With all preparations completed, by the morning of February 24th, Operation Sabre, the long-awaited coalition ground offensive, began.
It was pretty much nonstop when we got ready to make that division move. I mean, they made us fill all ammunition compartments in the tank at battle carry, which I think the coaxial machine gun is like 10,700 rounds. And you unload all the ammo boxes, link the belts up, and have a ready rack of ammunition. So I mean, everybody was hustling and bustling. And I mean, from that point, I don't know. I think people were probably just too busy to think about it. I mean, you wouldn't believe the cooperation. All the crews worked together. Really no bickering. About anything. Just doing what they got to do. And then we did that move, and I mean, I was kind of nervous, but when everybody else is kind of being tough about it, it just tends to rub off on everybody.
While the United States and its coalition partners unleashed General Schwarzkopf's Hail Mary, the Iraqis were convinced that the battle would be joined at the center of their defensive lines along the Saudi-Kuwait border and by amphibious assault. What the Iraqis could not realize was that the Allies had secretly moved 2 entire corps of American forces, supported by British and French divisions, far to the west in one of the largest and swiftest battlefield troop movements in history.
It was about 5 in the morning, and you ever heard that saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy? Well, it's like it should be no plan survives first contact with LD, because when we had the LD, my platoon was, we had stayed up all night. We were border guards, make sure nothing came across the border, and nothing came across the border. So when it was time for my company to move out, and through the breach lanes they had cut in the border, my company commander told me to stay there and provide overwatch. Well, during the night, a fog had rolled in, along with smoke from, I guess, the Iraqis who got blown up over, because you could see them shooting at night and getting bombed by the Air Force. So you couldn't see past the berm, really. So my company went ahead through the berm, through the cut in the berm, and I'm still doing overwatch, and I'm calling the commanders, hey, look, let me go, I'm ready to come through. And he's like, wait. So after about 15, 20 minutes, he gives me permission to come through. Well, the problem is they have moved on, and I don't know where they are. So me and the engineers are driving around lost, and all I see is thousands of vehicles, and I'm like, how am I gonna pick out my tank company when you got thousands of vehicles in front of you to your left, right, you don't know where they are.
When the ground war began, we were going to take the left hook into Iraq to the airfield. And what we had done from Saudi Arabia, I don't know if you've heard of the road march at the 1st Cav Division, the mechanized road march, which was, I forget how many miles, but it was like the biggest mechanized division move in history. It took us hours. I mean, we would traverse the gun over the back and swap the driver out with the loader so the loader could drive for a while. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, you'd refuel on the move.
This giant end run by more than 250,000 soldiers, spread over several hundred miles, moved deep into Iraqi territory, from the Saudi border behind the Iraqi forces, to deliver a fatal left hook. The flanking maneuver not only cut off all avenues of retreat north and west of Kuwait, it fulfilled Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Colin Powell's prediction that the coalition, specifically the American military, was going to cut off the head and kill the Iraqi army.
My duty as the security force for the Regimental Support Squadron was to protect them. If I remember correctly, there was approximately 960 some odd vehicles in the Regimental Support Squadron. Everything from the ambulances to fuelers to haulers carrying the ammunition for the entire regiment. And so you had a tank platoon and an infantry platoon, and with the few organic assets that they had, as protecting that as we moved forward. And as 2nd ACR's mission was the cavalry organization for the 7th Corps, they led 7th Corps into Iraq. So we were not on the front line, but right behind the lead squadrons, but in front of the regimental squadron.
Blowing sand and rain created conditions of low visibility, made worse by a pall of dense smoke from burning oil wells that the Iraqis had ignited.
I've read afterwards that it was the wettest and the coldest that region had seen in quite some time.
To the west of Kuwait, The 18th Airborne Corps advanced north into Iraq to secure the left flank of the coalition forces and establish forward support bases in Iraq. Airborne and French light armored units moved quickly and penetrated into Iraq.
There were some big armor wars going down there, and we learned really quick that a T-72 isn't quite the man, the boogeyman under the bed you thought it was, because our Bradleys could smoke holes right through them. The armor wasn't much. A lot of what we were doing was we were really upset and scared about his chemical capabilities and whatnot. So when 120-degree heat, when you're practicing in Mach 4 and you're putting on masks and you're going through drills, and the 82nd was always huge about timed drills, because when you're right up there at the broken end of the bottle, you've got to survive. You have to be quick. You can't think. You cannot hesitate. That's why they always, drill you over and over again, so that you'll do stuff without thinking about it.
The success of the airborne units permitted the armored formation to advance its timetable. It moved quickly, 3 brigades abreast, screened by the divisional cavalry squadron to its front. Opposition proved light, and the division maintained an average speed of 25 miles per hour.
To be honest with you, at first, when you don't really realize that you're getting shot at. Like when you're taking mortars, you're like, who's blowing something up? And then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, somebody's dropping mortars on us. And so you start to react. But like I say, when you're 19 and something dangerous is happening around you, you really, and I don't know, it never bit me that I was going to die in any way, shape, or form. So I hate to say I didn't have that fear, because you have to have a little bit of fear, but I don't know, it was just stupid youth. It just never occurred to me that I was going to come out of this in a body bag. So,
through the use of night vision devices, thermal imaging sites, and global positioning systems, GPS, the 24th Infantry Division continued to move throughout the night, traversing featureless desert without becoming lost.
I had an officer that told me once, he was in the battalion staff at the time, and they actually captured a couple of Iraqi officers. And while they had them, they were interrogating them, and they showed him a GPS. Now at the time, a GPS was about the size of a carton of cigarettes. This thing was huge. And they showed him one of those, and he was just amazed that we could navigate in the desert. And we showed him that that's what we were using to navigate in the desert. And he said, oh my God, how many of your division commanders have these? And they were like, well, our squad leaders have these. So it was, technology, we overwhelmed them with technology. They had no chance. These people were, people of the desert, yet they couldn't maneuver in the desert because they had no way of navigating. So it was a big technological jump.
The 24th Infantry Division continued its northerly movement throughout the day, capturing a large number of prisoners. As the end run began, the Marines were tasked with going for the jugular. After performing their own deception by shifting both Marine divisions some 40 to 50 miles northeast of their original staging area, the Marines stepped off into battle. The 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions, each more than 18,000 strong, and the U.S. Army 1st Brigade 2nd Armored Division plunged into the attack.
I just remember crossing, going into the other country, and I'm watching the tanks firing. I'm watching artillery land around myself. I had one land approximately 20, 30 feet from my vehicle, and my vehicle was a 26-ton, again, armored personnel carrier. And when it hit, it shook us like I was in a little soda can. The troops below, the infantry below, they were all freaking and panicking. I had them pulling on my leg and all that.
On their way, the Marines had to cross 2 belts of minefields, 12-foot-high sand berms, barbed wire defenses, booby traps, and fire trenches, all the while under sporadic attack by Iraqi artillery. These impenetrable barriers were quickly breached by the Marine teams.
We were actually sitting at the border of Kuwait. They had, what they had done was built up a berm, they had used bulldozers and pushed up this big 10-foot wall of just dirt, like a big berm. And basically what they told us is when we go into Kuwait, we're going straight up the middle. Like you said, they did have some units that was going to come around and flank them. Our job was to just go straight up the front.
As the two Marine divisions advanced, two Saudi and Qatari task forces moved up Kuwait's east coast in a similar drive. The initial Marine advance was described by Schwarzkopf in his February 27th briefing as follows.
It was a classic, absolutely classic military breaching of a very, very tough minefield, barbed wire, fire trench type barrier. They went through the first barrier like it was water. Then they brought both divisions streaming through that breach. Absolutely superb operation, a textbook, and I think it will be studied for many, many years to come as the way to do it.
It's one of the things where we've all worked together, so it worked out where, it was almost like a courtesy, if there's another vehicle coming, you let him go, and and then he gets through, he's going back to his unit. Because the military, especially Marine Corps, is all about formation. You break formation only if you need to, and so, to get through the little area, once you got through, you get back in your formation where you're supposed to be and keep continuing forward, which is the time, like I said, when the artillery, the tanks started taking gunfire and we started taking fire, and we had, we drove past blown up tanks. You can drive by and you look down, you can see tanks smoking where they've been blown up, and again, it's one of them things where it's just surreal. You never really think about the fact that, something that could have been me. Somebody could have blew me up and I wouldn't have seen it coming. It would have been 1 second you're here and all of a sudden you're not.
Overhead, Cobras, Harriers, and intruders provided close air support as the Marines pushed forward, meeting occasional resistance. Marine aircraft attacked in waves as engineers continued to shoot line charges and drop bundles of plastic pipes near trenches so the blade tanks could form makeshift bridges. Even though the 1st Division Marines encountered artillery fire and a mechanized counterattack, their attack proved unstoppable. Most Iraqis fought for only a few minutes before surrendering. Massive artillery and air support from Navy and Marine aircraft sparked a frenzy of surrender that at times slowed the progress of advancing Marine units.
That goes to President Bush. That goes to Bush.
In the POWs that we detained, there was no fight. Beat down, just wore out. A lot of them probably were fighting because they had to, not because they wanted to. It wasn't like a professional fighting force like us, where that's what we do professionally. So, they did hold their own in the vehicles they had for what they had, but we gave them a significant pounding before the ground wars.
The 2nd Marine Division enjoyed equal success. With the Army's Tiger Brigade on the west flank, the 8th Marine Regiment to the east, and the 6th Marine Regiment in the center, the division kicked off its attack. Within hours, they too had breached both defensive belts. Facing enemy mortar and small arms fire, the 2nd Division drove into Kuwait and took more than 5,000 EPWs by the end of the first day. On the second day of the ground war, both Marine divisions faced sporadic resistance as they pushed further into Kuwait. The real threat to the coalition's battle plan came from the burning oil.
I was approximately, I'd say 500 feet, maybe 1,000 feet behind the tanks when we actually, as far as the ground troops, I was there when the oil fires started. The oil fires is what I think really, really messed us up, as far as us on the ground. I remember, again, specifically one night, well, actually it was daytime, it was 12 noon, and it looked like it was 12 midnight. We couldn't see right in front of us. There was vehicles running into each other. You could just hear the radio. People, it was just so much confusion, and I'm sure that was what Saddam had in mind to do, and honestly, for about a day, it did work pretty well, because again, we were pounding him and doing our thing, but once the oil fire started, all the smoke where you really, really couldn't see anything, and we, being, again, our personnel carriers, we just had to stop. They just came out of the radio. Everybody just stop where you're at, don't move, don't do anything. And we just sat there for about 24 hours. It wasn't until the next day that the smoke kind of cleared and, the wind, I guess, adjusted. And we all came out and looked around, and our vehicles were almost nowhere near formation. We were vehicles inches from hitting each other, didn't know it. It was just so much confusion. But again, I'm sure that's what he had in mind, was to confuse us. But we just, I mean, like I said, I guess someone made the command decision, look, he's trying to confuse us, let's stop, recuperate, and, work things, get ourselves together and then continue. And it just so happened the next day the smoke had cleared, to where we could actually see. It was still a little smoky, but you can actually see. And just, it was just amazing how we had barely, dodged a bullet, pardon the pun, from, ramming each other. And, we almost took each other out. So.
They fought some intense battles along the way, and by the time Kuwait's international airport was secured on the 4th day of the ground war, the 2 Marine divisions had defeated an Iraqi force of 11 divisions. A dust storm and the onset of darkness, however, did not stop the American attack. Instead, U.S. forces relied upon superior technology to continuously identify and engage targets with Apache helicopters, Abrams tanks, and Bradley fighting vehicles.
The tanks themselves, with the turbine engine, they're very sensitive to sand and stuff because the intense heat in the combustion chamber would melt the sand, turn it into glass inside the combustion chamber. So you had these huge filters that a couple of times a day you had to take out and make sure you get the sand out so that the sand wouldn't work its way into the engines. And that, and just dealing with the shamals, the storms, the blowing wind and sand, and it was just silica dust fine, so it didn't matter what you did, it was going to work its way into every nook, cranny, crevice that was there. So we were given these scarves that were similar to t-shirt material. And then we would wrap them across our face and put our goggles on top of them, our CVCs or on, but the dust would always work its way in, and you were just covered with dust, even through the mop suits, which was, I couldn't understand how it could work its way through, but it made it there.
Some Iraqi positions were destroyed with precision fire from as far away as 3,000 meters. The steady attrition of the Iraqi defenses finally triggered widespread surrenders. The 24th Infantry Division resumed its advance to block the exits from Kuwait.
It seemed like we never quit moving. And of course with the Abrams, they burn quite a bit of fuel, regardless if you're moving or sitting still. So it seemed like I was constantly coordinating for refuel, and so we would I would make sure I had refuel situated, not less than 6 hours from the last time I refueled, and it seemed like all the time we were refueling on the move. HEMTT tanker would stop as we were moving, or a couple, and we'd move the tanks up on either side, get topped off, and continue to move, catch up with the to stay in front of the lead element.
Iraqi frontline units, some of which had been without communications or resupply since the outbreak of the air war, seemed relieved to surrender. One group of 400 was so desperate to give up that they surrendered to a pair of Apache helicopters.
These conscripts that they had gathered on their way south to come into Kuwait. As a matter of fact, my second tour I did in Iraq, the interpreter that I had was a 15-year-old member of the Army that we fought in the first Desert Storm. And he told me that him and his cousins got picked up in Numania as the Army was going south. And he said, "Oh, we had a fabulous time. We were down there, tearing up stuff, being general nuisances, and then all of a sudden these Apache helicopters came, and then we said, oh, to hell with that." So him and his buddy took off their uniforms and started walking toward Basra.
The Republican Guard was different. They were not disillusioned conscripts. They were well-trained, dedicated soldiers ready to stand and fight. But they were also expecting the main attack to come through Kuwait, and therefore remained oriented to the south. They were about to be blindsided by reality. As the U.S. 7th Corps turned east, it almost immediately began to encounter elements of the Republican Guard. On day 3 of the ground war, in one of the most significant battles of Desert Storm, a squadron of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment stumbled onto the defensive line of a Republican Guard division. What ensued was a clash that became known as the Battle of 73 Easting. On February 26, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment served as the screen for the advance of the 7th Corps. Blowing sand and mist reduced visibility to less than 1,000 meters and interfered with the ability of the regiment's helicopters to conduct aerial reconnaissance. Consequently, as the regiment approached the 70 Easting grid line on its maps, with its squadrons abreast, it abruptly encountered an Iraqi position defended by 30 T-72s and 12 BMPs.
We encountered armor at about 4:35 that morning when we ran into their armor. And let me just back up a little bit. One of the things that really stands out for that night is they changed the rules of engagement on us, something we wasn't aware of, because in training, when we go to gunnery, you hit the target fast because you want those points, you want to qualify your tank. Well, when we hit the Republican Guards, word came down that before we engaged the target, we had to ask for permission to engage the target. They were so afraid of fratricide. We had to send the range to the target and azimuth to the target, which was stupid because the compass doesn't work in a tank. Then describe the target, and then ask for permission. And then the company commander would go to the battalion commander, tell him what we saw, and then come down and give us permission. And it was just stupid. It was wasting time. And we didn't like that rule at all because, here we are in the middle of a fight and you come down with some silly rule like that. So we pretty much just made up an azimuth when we sent it up. I got range 1960, azimuth 80, and he was like, what's the target? A BMP. And, then he would go up higher, get permission. And then when they came down to give us permission, they wanted to do a platoon volley fire. All 4 tanks firing at one target. Like, that's a waste of rounds, Why you gonna have 4 tanks firing a heat round at a BMP when 1 tank is good enough? Or, 4 machine guns firing at a truck. That was ignorant, But that later on in the morning we ran into the tanks. We were pretty much sick of the rules of engagement, so to speak. And I remember I lazed to a tank, and it was about 2,000 meters away. Commander wouldn't give me permission, so I just told my guy to start shooting.
The cavalry continued to advance toward the Iraqis until it reached a low rise near the 73 Easting line, well past the initially intended stop line of 70 Easting. With darkness falling, the regiment consolidated its position. That night, the 1st Infantry Division, mechanized, passed through the regiment and continued the attack the next morning. In the course of this fight, Eagle Troop 2nd Squadron destroyed 2 Iraqi tank battalions in 23 minutes. Over 30 T-72s were eliminated in slightly over 6 minutes. A total of 300 Iraqi armored vehicles were destroyed and over 1,300 prisoners taken. The results were stunning. The T-72s, built up by the Pentagon into Cold War boogeymen, were helpless against the M1s. The Bradley fighting vehicles, designed to follow tanks, not to fight them, scored kill after kill. 10 M1s and 12 Bradleys had destroyed 30 T-72s, 16 armored infantry vehicles, and 39 trucks. There were no American losses. Similar results were recorded by other coalition units.
And we turned, instead of the sort of northeasterly direction that we were attacking in, we turned and began moving due east toward Kuwait. Early morning, it wasn't no more than an hour after, if I remember correctly, we began moving. I received calls through the MP company commander, that was my communications relay from the Regimental Support Squadron 3, that they had an ambulance coming back from 2nd Squadron had received fire from an enemy element that had been somehow missed during the movement during the night. And I called my platoons online, and we began moving toward the direction of travel. And as we moved forward, the ambulance, tracked ambulance, was moving back to the safety of the regimental support squadron to the med troop. So I was receiving what information I could through the MP company commander that what the direction of travel that we should move to intercept this enemy force. So when we encountered them, when we saw them for the first time, they were out of, they were in the process of actually moving out of their dug-in positions. Afterwards, we discovered that during the Battle of the 73rd Easting and afterwards, they didn't move because they had tried to retreat north, the Republican Guard. And this organization, this element, for whatever reason, either didn't hear the call, and they were left there. It was a motorized rifle company, size of element about 10 to 11 armored vehicles of MTLBs, PT-76s, was what I was told afterwards. We saw them in the distance and received, sporadic fire from them. We were probably at a distance of a kilometer and a half. And I initially gave my tank platoon the order to come online, and we're going to assault the enemy position. Well, the Prick 77 that was in the platoon sergeant's wingman's tank went on the blink, and he didn't hear the call, so I ended up with 3 tanks online. The infantry platoon was riding drag on the regimental support squadron, so they were too far back to answer the call to come forward. And all this time, I've been relaying, or messages had been relayed from the MP company commander that Redcatcher, which is the regiment's aviation squadron, was also sending an element to intercept this enemy organization. So we see the enemy organization. I gave the platoon fire command to bring them under fire, and within a matter of a minute or so, 8 of the 10 enemy vehicles were burning.
On the night of February 26-27, retreating Iraqi military personnel were attacked by American aircraft and ground forces on Highway 80, leading north to Iraq. The scenes of devastation on the road are some of the most recognizable images of the war. Spotting the massive Iraqi columns, U.S. Marine aircraft blocked the road in front of the retreating troops with anti-tank mines, and then bombed the rear of the massive vehicle column of mostly Iraqi regular army forces. This effectively boxed in the Iraqi forces, creating an enormous traffic jam and leaving the Iraqi troops as sitting targets for follow-up airstrikes. Over the next 10 hours, scores of Marine, Navy, and Air Force pilots attacked the convoy using a variety of ordnance. Some survivors of the air attacks were later engaged by arriving coalition ground units, while the vehicles that managed to evade the traffic jam and continued to drive on the road north were often targeted individually. One portion of the road, at the bottleneck, had been reduced to a long, uninterrupted line of more than 300 stuck and abandoned vehicles. The wreckage found on the highway consisted of military vehicles and many more commandeered civilian vehicles, such as cars and buses. Many of these vehicles were filled with stolen Kuwaiti property.
It was horrific. You see mangled bodies and, burnt, charred remains. And it's pretty, when you're 19, you're not afraid of death. Well, that will make you afraid of death when you see the really ugly side. The guy that's been cooked alive, and the A-10s had come in and hit this one column that we ran across, and they had just ripped it apart. You see the awesome destructive capability that we wield, and how it can just mangle and destroy flesh. And you'd see these packs of dogs running around that were obviously eating corpses. You see, I remember it like it was yesterday. We saw one dog that was running with a hand in its mouth like that. So us being more or less a gang of rednecks, of course, we kill the dogs, because once they get the taste of flesh, they'll want nothing more. But it was absolutely very humbling to see how small that you really are in the universal scope of things, when you see how you can just be ripped apart like that, for nothing. And you see these people and you're like, half of these guys were conscripts that were just trying to get back home. They just didn't, they were forced kind of into this situation. When you look back on it, you understand that they were pretty much just gathered up and thrown into this situation. And their officers left them. Some of them were chained inside their tanks so they couldn't run. There's a lot of horrible things going on. A lot of bodies, a lot of just stinking, rotten bodies and blown up equipment.
The death toll from the attack is unknown and still remains a controversial issue. Some independent estimates go as high as 10,000 or even tens of thousands of casualties, but this is highly unlikely. According to a 2003 study by the Project on Defense Alternatives Research, there were probably about 7,500 to 10,000 people who rode in the cut-off main caravan to begin with. But once the bombing started, most of them are believed to have simply left their vehicles in panic and escaped through the desert or into the nearby swamps. 450 to 500 of them were taken prisoner. The actual figure was probably a minimum toll of at least 500 to 600 dead, which seems to be more plausible. On and near Highway 8 to the east, Iraqi forces were trying to either redeploy, to stand and fight, or simply escape. Many of them belonged to the elite Iraqi Republican Guard's 1st Armored Division. This elite force was engaged by the U.S. ground forces, consisting of 9 artillery battalions and a battalion of AH-64 Apache helicopter gunships. Hundreds of Iraqi vehicles were systematically destroyed along a 50-mile stretch of the highway and at scattered points across the desert. This engagement, which wasn't known to media and the public, still remains relatively obscure, even as the most of the graphic images of scorched corpses, commonly attributed to the Highway of Death attacks and often considered among the iconic images of the war, were actually taken on Highway 8 and not on Highway 80. A large column of remnants of the Hammurabi Division, attempting to withdraw to safety in Baghdad, were also engaged and obliterated a few days later, deep inside the Iraqi territory, in a controversial post-war turkey shoot-style incident known as the Battle of Rumelia. By the 4th day of the ground war, it was clear that the Iraqis were beaten, and beaten badly. Even before coalition forces entered Kuwait City, plans for a ceasefire were already underway. The fighting stopped on February 28th at exactly 5 a.m. Kuwaiti time. The ground war lasted exactly 100 hours.
When I talked to you all before, and you asked me what we were going to do if we had to go to war, and I told you we were going to kick ass, and that's exactly what we did.
It's like a letdown. You're like, this is it? Because you were built up so much of, the 4th largest army in the world, and they really didn't put up too much of a fight, and then all of a sudden it's over, and you're like, this is it? This is it? And then it wasn't like, oh yeah, we get to go home, because we knew we were going to go home right away. It was just, it just ended. I guess it's over with. I'm trying to go sleep somewhere.
actually we halted before the airport. When we did the division move, we moved north through Saudi Arabia into Iraq and made the left hook and then stopped. The mission from Schwarzkopf basically told first team to finish it off and let's go home. And now I will say at that time, a lot of people were pretty disappointed because by that time, everybody's pumped up, ready to go. And, we had no idea that they were going to call a ceasefire, I mean, that was just like, what? And it was pretty quick after that everything just settled down. And we got so far, you're right at the 10-yard line. But
you're always kind of glad that, the end of hostilities are over. We hit Basra, we actually called for fire on that airport. And, we rained it with artillery, tore it to pieces. As a matter of fact, we hit something. And I later found out because I talked to an Iraqi counterpart I had in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He said it was a gasoline line. We didn't know if it was an ammo dump or whatever, but we hit it with artillery and it was just over. But when they called it down and said the war was over, there was a lot of guys, and myself included, who thought we should probably just go right on up to Baghdad because there was a lot of turmoil, especially in Baghdad, the Kurdistan regions, the southern part of Baghdad, which is real big Shia country, and there was a lot of upheaval. And personally, I thought, hey, if we can capitalize on this, we can overturn the entire country. More or less throw some fuel on the fire, and hopefully these people will take over their own country again. But we didn't, and we didn't for diplomatic reasons. At the time, you're the young guy at the pointy end of the spear, and you're wanting to go.
by that time, everybody was confident. We had these brand new tanks. I mean, brand new. So brand new weapons. I mean, what more could you ask for?
The end of coalition combat operations marked the accomplishment of the two principal objectives of the war, the liberation of Kuwait and the reduction of the regional threat posed by Iraq's military. But it did leave Saddam in control of the country. That would be a task for another day.